I begin by thanking His Excellency Prime Minister Masroor Barzani for this gathering. Yesterday was, I felt, a real moment of optimism for the region, where we can actually have discussions here and talk about uncomfortable truths, including climate change. And he opened his remarks yesterday by addressing the issue head on, and I absolutely applaud him for that. You'd think on the long list of challenges that Kurdistan faces, he is talking about the thing that is challenging all of us as humanity. And of course, in 10 days' time, we will gather in Dubai for COP28. An important moment, as you quite rightly have identified, because the clock is ticking, and Sultan Al-Jaber, who will assume the presidency of COP, makes that point every time we see him, which is that the clock is ticking. Now, why I think this is a big moment for humanity and for the planet is because I'm an engineer by background. I'm a chemical engineer, process engineer. And engineers think in process. One of the things that we will need to achieve at COP28 is the global audit, because as you quite rightly pointed out, we all talk about climate change and we all want to do the right thing, but no one quite knows where the planet is at. There is no audit of what emissions are and what mitigations are in place. You know, the UK has been absolutely committed to reducing our own emissions, and actually it was David Cameron, who's now back in government, who really pushed through on renewables, whether it's onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, while still growing the economy. Because what you can't do, in my view, is attempt to address this issue without thinking about the impact on the individual, on the family. As you quite rightly mentioned, I was Chancellor of the Exchequer. You have to always remember that somewhere in the process, someone has to pay. Now, the second priority for COP28 is how do we make sure that the 100 billion that's going to be available for those countries that need to have the maximum amount of financial help is really there, i.e. that the commitments are not just words, they are being delivered. And I think if we can achieve those two things at COP, we will begin to really make a difference and keep that increase in temperature to 1.5 degrees. That is essential as we gather in 10 days' time. Now, I would say one other thing. If you think about the challenges here in the KRI, whether it's political, the relationship with Baghdad, constitutional, as we heard yesterday, again, this government is leading the way. I think there are 3 projects, if I'm not mistaken, in solar alone, in Soleimani, in Erbil, and in Duhok. That is action on the ground. So it's a combination of making sure we're focused, but then deliverables. What is important for all of us as political leaders in our own countries is not to just talk about these things, but actually then think through how we're going to deliver against it. And that's what I urge everyone to do in COP28.
As you say, Nadhim, we're in a part of the world now where the effects of climate change are likely to be profound. In our lifetimes, as Kak Masroor said yesterday, we are going to face issues of mass migration, food insecurity, water scarcity, all brought on by a rapidly warming planet that is going to take a bigger toll on the Middle East and this region than perhaps other parts of the world. That said, this is also the oil-producing cradle. The KRG, Iraq, will need to continue to pump oil to keep their economies afloat and to create the financial resources to invest in new energies. Where are we, do you think, in this discussion that absolutely needs to be had here in Iraq and in the KRG, balanced against the imperatives of needing to get on by?
Look, you're absolutely right. I think I would say 2 things on that. The first is, imagine a world where the Baghdad government and the KRI are able to get to an agreement and we can restart the oil pipeline Why is that world important? Because then you begin to deliver the resources, i.e. government has the ability, the money, to be able to deal with flaring. Iraq, as you fly over it, you see an extraordinary set of flames that are clearly polluting the world and losing resource, vital resource for the country. We're not going to move away from hydrocarbons without making these important decisions, i.e. prosperity, which is why the prosperity agenda is so important, which is why the message that I've been hearing in this conference is, look, why can't we agree on this stuff? Because ultimately, if we are bringing revenue to KRI, to the whole of Iraq, that can only be a good thing to be able to pay for the mitigations we need to make to save the planet. So let's get around the table and fix this quickly and get revenue so that we can pay for some of this stuff. Now, on hydrocarbons, the reason I say to you we have to have a global audit, because I don't know if the audience will know this, I suspect my friend on my left will know this, but just to keep the planet today operational, i.e. being able to pay for everything that the world currently does, we basically need to pump about 250 million barrels of oil a day. Now let me tell you how that's broken down to. Every day, the planet needs about 100 to 105 million barrels of oil. It fluctuates. Sometimes it comes below 100 to 97, but it's between 100 and 105 million barrels a day. It needs about 80 million barrels equivalent of oil in gas to keep the planet going. So that's 80 plus 100. And then coal is another 70 million barrels a day equivalent of oil. So it's 250 million barrels a day that the planet requires just so that we can feed, house, clothe, keep going as a planet. That transition needs to happen. Of course, we all know we need to move towards renewables, onshore, offshore, solar, and most importantly, nuclear. We have, when I was Chancellor, and Boris Johnson was here yesterday, to his credit, he pushed through on a second large nuclear project, which I signed off before leaving office, and on SMRs and AMRs, so small modular reactors, which we're collaborating with our American colleagues on, and of course, ultimately, the real breakthrough in nuclear will be on the AMRs, which are factory manufactured, effectively power for the world. You're not going to move away from hydrocarbons without massive investment in nuclear. That takes about 30 years. So if you work out where we are today, we're in 2023, about to enter 2024. To hit 2050, there needs to be a massive investment in nuclear. Countries like Iraq, if they focus on the prosperity agenda, focus on making sure they balance the budget in Baghdad, produce some excess, hopefully, to the budget, surplus, then you can begin to invest in nuclear, as other nations are doing in the region. But without that focus on prosperity, setting aside our differences, as we just heard from the wonderful patriarch, we're never going to get there. And the longer we spend fighting and arguing and persecuting minorities in Iraq, the worse the situation will get vis-a-vis the planet. That's my message to this conference.
Sami mentioned that some of the talk around climate goals have been optimistic in the past. What we're seeing this year, and you identified COP28 as being a seminal moment in the decades-long discourse now, and I actually think it is. We've seen some pretty ambitious goals set in the lead-up by Emirati officials, in particular to a phase down of all fossil fuels and to create energy systems which are free of unabated fossil fuels by mid this century. Now, this is being led by somebody who's been a leading oil producer. It's how times have changed, that we now have the oil industry so heavily invested in it. But do you see the COP meeting in 10 days' time as being potentially a global meeting where we actually crack through the barrier and start to commit to binding targets that do make a difference?
Yes, I do, is the simple answer. But it takes a lot of work. And the reason the global order is important. It sounds like something that is would come out of a operations room, a chief operating officer. But that's what sometimes you need. When you look at the leadership that Sultan Al-Jaber has provided on this, because he's an engineer, is to actually say, hold on a second, before we start, really making a difference, we need to audit, right? And every country has to sign up to the global audit as to where are we, right? What are the challenges, and then what are the mitigations that are in place? Once you have clarity on that, you can then begin to move forward, including, of course, by focusing on the countries that need the most help financially, which is why the second target is to make sure that that money, that the 100 billion that is being pledged is real and is deliverable. And I take on what Bayan Khan is saying about the ability for that money to not only be targeted at sovereigns, but also at autonomous region like the KRG, KRI here. So I'm optimistic. We are certainly leaning in as a country. His Majesty the King will attend, I think it's his first COP meeting, as well as, of course, our Prime Minister and others. And in many ways, it takes practical steps for the world to understand the challenge of moving from a hydrocarbon world. Remember that number I gave you, 250 million barrels a day. By the way, and that's just to stand still. If you look at the current trajectory of the growth of the global economies, albeit China's slowed down a little bit, but nevertheless, growth is beginning to come back there. You're going to need, just to stand still, probably raise that 250 million a day to about 265, right? So we need additional investment in the industry today so that people don't feel poorer as we transition. People find it hard sometimes to talk about the two things at the same time, i.e. hydrocarbon investment. Why are you investing in hydrocarbons when you're talking about climate change and you need to sort of move away? Actually, you need to talk about that. Why? Because it's part of the transition, i.e. if we're going to carry nations with us, if we're going to carry the Kurdish people with us, and it doesn't need to cost more money if we have smart government, good government, people thinking through where can I get investment coming in, as we've heard from Matt and others, to be able to deliver against this. It needs education, absolutely right. Bayan is spot on. It needs better education. You look at the electricity metering program here that has been delivered. It means people will think about how they consume energy in their household. So that's important. But good leadership, and the Emiratis are leading the way on this in terms of wanting to celebrate the last barrel of oil, means smart collaboration and investment. And I go back and say to you, it is absolutely doable. What worries me and breaks my heart is the region is now engulfed in conflict and war, and of course in what I would certainly describe as petty bullying of the weak, whilst the planet requires us all to raise our game and collaborate.
Just in terms of raising our game and collaborating, there's been a long-held view that some of the worst polluters are the biggest laggards when it comes to committing to or meeting climate goals. Let's just talk about China at the moment. Are they on side? Are they going to commit to the goals set by COP28? Are they where we need them to be?
I think we all have to challenge ourselves, including China, where China is doing incredibly well. And I saw this when I was business and industry minister and held the portfolio for nuclear, is their investment in nuclear technology, in civil nuclear. They have made that commitment a long time ago and are really driving their large nuclear, their SMRs, and the AMR programs that they have in their own country. And it's incumbent on us to do the same thing. One of the things that I with my opposite number, Janet Yellen, were planning to do, is to look at the opportunity of coming together in the way we did in Europe with Airbus, the 5 nations of Europe producing some of the best planes in the world. I think there's a real opportunity for us with the United States of America, the United Kingdom, to produce the future of nuclear, which is effectively factory-made nuclear energy that can be installed really efficiently and fast. And we have a project on SMRs between Rolls-Royce and Constellation Energy in the US. So there's a lot of work going on. But nevertheless, every nation has to do its part.
Bayan.
Like Mr. Zahawi, I'm a civil environmental engineer as well. And I think one of the major issues for environmental implementation is the high cost on the economies. But I like to go to areas where you can make money and profit. I think one of the areas the KRG could do very excellent job is in the United States now, there's a high pressure on electrical car industry. The bottleneck is the production, research and development of batteries. And I think it's a national security issue now in the US because most of the batteries are produced in China. I think the KRG, with the Prime Minister completely enlightened and committed to diversify and modernize his economy, is an excellent candidate to become a leader in that field, even on a small scale, but could expand in the future. And it could be a very positive contributor, not only to the Kurdish economy, to the positive national security, both for the United States and Kurdistan. And I think I would like to throw this idea like food for thought for the panel to see your reaction. Thank you.
It's a very good point, well made. And again, if you think of the natural resources, the wealth of Kurdistan, all these opportunities are worth considering. But I think, again, the importance to Matt's point is capital needs stability, security, economic security, which is what the Prime Minister is delivering here. And I think it's incumbent on Baghdad to be cognizant of that fact. And the opportunity is now to grasp that and to deliver against it. That's how you get capital to invest.
We have time for one last question.